This is the Care Radio Podcast with Gary Robinson.
Hello and welcome. This is the very first edition and I'm delighted to be with you. Here at Care Radio, we're all about carers and those being cared for right around the UK. We also have a website and social media which we'd love you to follow. I'll have more information on that a little bit later on. In our podcasts, we'll have lots of amazing stories to share with you, along with some information for the caring community, as I said, right across the UK. So in this podcast, we'll be joined by Angie Fergusson, the Chief Executive Officer of Perth Autism Support.
You know, social media plays such a huge part in our lives, particularly now, and we see a lot of Instagram perfect lifestyles with home baking and PEs, lessons going on in the living room every morning and all these things. If you're not doing that, it's okay. You're doing the best that you can and keep doing it.
We'll also be in Leeds with Linda Sage for the first part of the A to Z of emotional resilience and psychological well-being. It's a little bit of a mouthful.
Fear and anxiety is illogical. And if you start asking questions to yourself about why you're actually feeling like this or what emotion this is, then you can dominate it and you can change it.
We'll be joining our friends at BFBS, the Forces Station, as we hear from Captain Ian Johnson, who's been supporting the NHS with his work around care homes during the pandemic.
The biggest thing for me was to introduce myself, let them know I was from the army, but, really make sure that my voice was welcoming, light in tone, and just basically relaxing them, because it was key that they weren't fearful of what they had to do the following 48 hours.
And we'll be hearing from the amazing Dr. Suzanne Z Dyke.
Carers are often frustrated by other people's behaviour, by the behaviour of the person they're caring for, whether that's a child whose behaviour is confusing, or who refuses to do what you ask them to do, or who has a whole pattern of refusing to do what you ask them to do, or whether you're caring for someone who's older and their behaviours got frustrating or confusing.
You're listening to the Care Radio Podcast.
So, to our first guest, Angie Fergusson. Angie is the founder and chief executive of Perth Autism Support. The organisation was created back in 2011 to bridge the gap in services for autistic children and their families. Angie is, as you would expect, very passionate about supporting autistic individuals, and that support has been needed more than ever over the last few months.
It's an uncertain time for all of us, but certainly for autistic individuals, this can be really heightened due to mostly the changes in routine, not being at school, work, college, or being able to access the same social opportunities as they usually would. Socially distancing from people as well is quite a hard concept. It's quite hard for us anyway to work out. But understanding why we can't see loved ones, why we can't see our usual support network, and if we can, why we can't be close to them, hug them if they are sensory-seeking touch, and the ambiguity of knowing when it will all end. One of the things that we always work to when we are working with autistic individuals is to make sure they know what to expect and what is expected for them. And obviously through this period, none of us have any idea of when it will end. And in terms of the support at home for parents and carers, homeschooling particularly has been a huge struggle. Home may well be seen as downtime for an autistic individual, so you don't do schoolwork at home, you do it in school. So therefore, to then try and move that into a home environment can be quite high anxiety for autistic individuals. And for parents and carers as well, the loss of their support network, and that's particularly for, parents who might have young people who don't access social care services and who rely on family and friends, who may be single parents who are now at home 24/7 with their young people with the complete loss of a support network. So it can be challenging for the whole household.
And when you say that support networks are, of which you are a major part of one in Scotland, of course, a major part, have they disappeared completely, or what help is still available to carers and parents?
So the support networks are still available across the UK, and certainly we have seen a huge rise in online activities for parents and carers. So that goes from everything from webinars right through to online chat groups on Facebook. And there is a lot of information coming out. And I guess the one sort of hesitance I have with that is that it can be overwhelming. Parents and carers can have an awful lot of information thrown at them because everybody wants to help, everybody wants to be there, which is right and absolutely brilliant that everybody does. But it can be quite overwhelming. So it's about really taking time to have a look at what is available, whether that's in your local area, but the beauty of being online means that you can access supports across the UK. So it's about really finding out what works for you and what's right for you.
And during non-COVID-19 times, what sort of challenges were you and your similar organisations across the UK? What sort of challenges were you finding when we were a couple of months ago, if you see what I mean? What will those normal times, do you think, ever return for organisations like yours?
I think before the lockdown, there were still lots of challenges in terms of social care and the supports that social care organisations provide. It's very difficult through the previous economic climate that we've had, and goodness knows what it'll be like when we get back to work. But certainly from the point of view of resource and being able to support the numbers of young people coming through the organisation, we're seeing a continued rise in numbers of autism diagnosis, and that is unlikely to change. So to keep up with the demand and to make sure that everybody's receiving a quality autism specialist service is probably one of our biggest challenges. So if I could give parents and carers 3 bits of advice through this period. Firstly, I would say try to keep as much of a routine as possible. It will be a new routine and we will need to transition out of it. But if you can keep as much routine incorporating the daily exercise with the guidelines from the government for the person that you care for, and to make it as healthy a routine as possible. But be in mind that you will need to work out of that at the end of lockdown. So start to do that work now. The second piece of advice that I would give is about self-care. We can't pour from an empty cup as carers, and it's really important that we take that time, whether it's sitting with a cup of tea in the back garden for 10 minutes, whether it is watching EastEnders for half an hour, whatever it takes to be able to have that downtime. And don't be hard on yourself, and particularly those who have children who are of school age. You know, social media plays such a huge part in our lives, particularly now, and we see a lot of Instagram perfect lifestyles with home baking and PE lessons going on in the living room every morning and all these things. If you're not doing that, it's okay. You're doing the best that you can and keep doing it. And the third thing would probably be use the support that is out there. As I mentioned, there's lots and lots of support there. It may take a while to find all of that and to work out what is right for you. But when you do find that support, utilise it. It doesn't mean that you need to be talking to someone all the time, but make sure that you're reading through things. And it's often about that peer support to understand that you're not the only one. You're not in the situation alone. There are thousands up and down the country that are feeling exactly the same way that you are.
Angie Ferguson, thank you very much indeed.
This is the Care Radio Podcast with Gary Robinson.
Still to come in this very first Care Radio podcast, we'll be hearing from Captain Ian Johnson, who's been instrumental in 4th Battalion, the Mercian Regiment response to COVID-19 in care homes across the UK.
Just seeing how this staff was so resilient, that was just something that was really, really levelling, I suppose, for me, knowing that some of these staff have left their families to move into the care homes, and seeing the care and the interaction they had with their residents was great.
This is the Care Radio Podcast with Gary Robinson.
It's time now for us to take a look at some of the big news stories out there. Stories that we feel are of importance to carers and those being cared for around the UK. Dementia UK is launching Lives on Hold. It's a new campaign which aims to shine a spotlight on the lockdown which dementia carers face on an ongoing basis and not just during the coronavirus pandemic. As part of Lives on Hold, as part of the campaign, the charity has created a compelling video demonstrating how the general public's feelings of isolation, loneliness and significant day-to-day restrictions within the current lockdown are similar to past, present and future experiences for thousands of people living with dementia in the UK.
You're listening to Carers News on the Care Radio podcast.
The BBC has reported that it's estimated that there are 800,000 children and young people across the UK caring for a family member with a disability, illness or mental health problem, some as young as 5 years old. According to the charity Action for Children, coronavirus has made things worse. Because of lockdown, young carers just cannot get a break from caring.
This is Carers News on the Care Radio podcast.
Millions of carers juggling a job with looking after sick relatives will be given greater legal protection and more money to help them under plans proposed by Liberal Democrat Ed Davey. Mr Davey's 5-point plan is caring made a protected characteristic in the Equality Act, giving carers increased protection in the workplace and beyond, forcing employers to make reasonable adjustments for carers as they would for disabled staff to allow people to combine caring with a job. A boost to the carers allowance from £75 a week, a 12% increase from the current level of £67.25, raising the amount a carer can earn before losing out on carers allowance from £128 a week to £160 a week would give them greater work flexibility. And point number 5, young carers would receive free travel on all public transport. Mr Davey was a carer to his mother when he was a teenager and is a parent to a disabled child.
It's Carers News on the Care Radio podcast.
And finally, the Queen recently spoke with 4 carers and the Carers Trust Chief Executive Gareth Howells from Windsor Castle via Zoom, it's been reported. In a video released on the royal family's Twitter account, the Queen could be heard saying, "Interesting listening to all your tales and stories. I'm very impressed by what you've achieved already, and I'm very glad to have been able to join you today. Thank you, Mum."
This is the Care Radio podcast with Gary Robinson.
Our website is at careradiouk.com. We're on Facebook as Care Radio UK and on Twitter as Care_radio. Coming soon, we'll be hearing the first part of the A to Z of emotional resilience and well-being from Linda Sage.
Just stop for a moment. And if you concentrate on your breathing, you're not concentrating on the anxiety, so it automatically subsides. Breathing in, breathing out, counting your breaths is really important as well, because that way you're concentrating on something else.
Let's now hear from Captain Ian Johnson. He spent 33 years in the Army, serving with the Corps of Army Music and finishing as Director of Music with the Scots Guards Band. Since leaving, he started his own consultancy in HR, but has remained attached to the military, deciding to join as a reservist. Now the Director of Music for the Band of the Mercian Regiment, back home in Wolverhampton, Captain Johnson has been instrumental in 4th Battalion, the Mercian Regiment response to COVID-19. As he's been explaining to Hal Stewart from BFBS, the Forces Station.
When the unit was mobilised, we were asked for volunteers, and I volunteered to mobilise. Yes, I did have my own business, but I thought, I needed to give something back, so I suspended operations with my own business. When I mobilised, it was the inception of the regional care home response teams, which was delivering tests to care homes, receiving them from the regional test sites and delivering them to care homes and collecting them in the end of the day from various sites, for us mostly around the Lancashire area.
I bet you never imagined you'd be undertaking a role such as this in a situation such as this when you first decided to join 4th Battalion, the Mercian Regiment.
No, absolutely not. But that's the beauty of the Army, no 2 days are the same, as I've learned from my regular service. And the motto I've adopted for my family as well, we have to adapt and overcome. And we face different challenges of different styles, through parenting, our relationships and families, whatever's put in front of us, so long as we get the relevant preparation and training, we're prepared to deliver. And whilst this was a new situation, I was obviously able to call upon old skills, well-trodden skills to deliver the service to the care homes.
Can you remember that first day of helping during this pandemic, the thoughts, the fears, any other emotions that not only you recall feeling, but I can also imagine in a care home, a number of people there would have been very much afraid.
Absolutely. The staff, as I know, my wife is a nurse and she has worked in care homes, so I understand the immediate pressures that the staff are under. So that was a great insight for me to actually shape the approach that I was going to take. But the first morning was a case of we're on our way to deliver your tests. So it was a new situation for them. The biggest thing for me was to introduce myself, let them know I was from the army, but, really make sure that my voice was welcoming, light in tone, and just basically relaxing them, because it was key that they weren't fearful of what they had to do the following 48 hours. Having to wear face masks and gloves, being able to see your eyes, you have to be even more overly expressive, I would suggest, so that they can see the expression in your eyes as well. And immediately that relaxes them. And you talk them through the process, what's required. And by the time you leave, that it's a smiling conversation and everyone's more relaxed.
Tell me about it, drawing on that history of music and playing a variety of music for multiple care homes.
Well, we quickly identified here within the chain of command, the OC and I had a discussion before we deployed about the possibility of the use of music and the power of music. It's a phrase that we use across the services called soft power, that music can be not just used for stirring troops and rousing them into battle, but also for the post-conflict relaxation, or for relaxation in other forms, either in the messes or in the barrack lines. So we use that principle really of soft power to offer our services to the care homes, whereby we said, we do have a musical capability, myself and Colour Sergeant Wheeler, who is the percussionist from the band. We were able to come and perform for you for an hour or so for your residents. So obviously we couldn't enter the care homes. So whilst we were delivering the test, we were dropping them at the front door, speaking, obviously at the safe distance. We went and they brought the residents out, those that were able, who weren't under isolation. And again, we kept the isolation distance and we performed for them for up to an hour, and the response was magical.
Have you found solace in your music during this time?
100%, absolutely. It's one of the major things that keeps me going, keeps me sustained, and has done throughout my life and throughout my career. De-stress through it. You can excite yourself through it. You can focus yourself through it. If I have to, writing or any reports or any blogs that I do for my own business, music is there in the background to focus me. I use music to sleep to meditate to. All pervasive in my life in all aspects. Absolutely.
Sounds it, yeah. Did you find that when you were working with people in these regional care homes, that any of them actually inspired you throughout this time?
Yeah, just seeing how the staff was so resilient, that was just something that was really, really levelling, I suppose, for me, knowing that some of these staff have left their families to move into the care homes, and seeing the care and the interaction they had with their residents was great.
Thanks there to our friends from BFBS, the Forces Station. Coming soon, we'll be hearing from Dr. Suzanne Z Dyke.
Human beings' behavior is underpinned by a biological state and by what we've learned is scary in life and how we've learned how to comfort ourselves. And that matters as much at the older ages as it does at the early ages. It matters as much when you are losing the ability to think and be so aware of what you're feeling and doing, which is what dementia brings. It matters in midlife when we get frustrated. Not everybody understands their own behavior. Not everybody certainly understands their partner's behavior.
You're listening to the Care Radio podcast.
Linda Sage is a seasoned criminal psychologist, speaker, trainer, author and broadcaster with over 3 decades of hands-on experience. Now she's got many clients in both the private and public sectors. Her passion and message are clear. Self-care is not a luxury. Now more than ever, avoiding or better preventing compassion fatigue, secondary traumatic stress and burnout should be primary concerns. Here's Linda with the first part of her A to Z of emotional resilience and well-being.
Oh, that sounds such a mouthful. But for an awful lot of people, anything to do with the mind or the psyche seems very, very dangerous or scary, and they think of the white men with coats that are going to take them away. But actually, it's not like that. We've all got a mind and we can all make changes. And a lot of the things that we take as that's how it is, that's how I am, that's how it's always been done, are just the way that we've let it be done. And so we're going to be looking at ways of keeping you safe, keeping you healthy, in this time of a lot of isolation, and also perhaps you're in a home where you've got a lot of people around you and you're not used to being together all the time. So anxiety is the A we're going to start with today. So anxiety, most people think about anxiety as a bad thing, as a negative feeling. In fact, we feel anxious at good times too. Think about when you were walking down the aisle or exchanging your vows or going for a job interview, or even when something went really right, you open your exam results. But we like to use different words. If it's nervous or apprehensive, but actually it's anxiety. So trying to get a reasonable amount of feelings is good, because if you think about our emotions as a seesaw, a little bit up, a little bit down is absolutely great. But we're living in a time when anxiety is being bred, because normally as human beings, when we're in something or a situation we don't really know much about, or we don't feel as if we have much control over, then we tend to feel anxious. So getting that on a balance is the healthy way of dealing with it. It's when your emotions go very, very high, very low, and they stay there. That's when they start dominating you rather than you being in control of your emotions. So anxiety builds up and you can feel the start of it. So that's the place to start. When we feel the start of perhaps the niggling in the tummy, or the nerves or sound starts to feel very sharp, absolutely acknowledge it. I can understand that. I'm feeling this. And then you can stop. And what actually is making me feel like this? And when you really start to look at it, because fear and anxiety is illogical. And if you start asking questions to yourself about why you're actually feeling like this, or what emotion this is, then you can dominate it and you can change it. So the first thing is to acknowledge it. Once you start feeling anxious, acknowledge it. The second one is stop. Just stop for a moment. And if you concentrate on your breathing, you're not concentrating on the anxiety, so it automatically subsides. Breathing in, breathing out, counting your breaths is really important as well, because that way you're concentrating on something else. So you will find that naturally the anxiety, when you're not thinking about it, reduces as well. So once you've got that, you can actually start thinking about what's causing you to be anxious. And then you can do something about the actual cause rather than the symptom, because anxiety is a symptom of what the underlying issue is. So dealing with the issue then takes your anxiety away. But it's quite normal to feel like that at the moment, as I say, because the world as we know it isn't as we know it. It's different. So trying to make a change always takes time and effort. But for the meantime, hopefully, you can start looking at your anxiety with different eyes. It's not a threat. It's something that you can conquer and be in control of. So take your time, think about it, recognise it, and quash it.
Linda Sage there, and we'll be hearing more from Linda as we work our way through the A to Z in the coming podcasts. Thank you as well to our good friends at ELFM for their production support. You can learn more about Linda at her website lindasage.com. It's time for our last guest on this, our first podcast. It's Dr. Suzanne Z Dyke. Suzanne completed her PhD at Yale University in the United States, and she's now based in Tayside. Suzanne's focus is on how we care for our children, because the decisions we make determine the kind of caring society that, well, surely we all want. She's just published the second edition of her book, Saber-Toothed Tigers and Teddy Bears, the Connected Baby Guide to Attachment. But what does that title mean?
That language is my attempt to make science much more accessible to the public. We've had this science of attachment for about 75 years now. And I got a bit frustrated as a research scientist and a developmental psychologist that more of the public, professionals, parents, carers, everybody doesn't better understand what that science is telling us. And what at its core it's doing is helping us to understand what we do with fear in our body and how we comfort ourselves. And so that's the saber-toothed tiger, fear, the fierce part of our stress system, and the part of our stress system that helps us calm down and comfort ourselves, the teddy bear system. And the way that system functions in your body, every single individual out there, was shaped by experiences you had as a young child. And that means that the way we treat our children is much more important than once upon a time we knew. And so I used that language, which can sound about a bit twee and a bit soft to people, because I wanted to help give a new way into the science. And not every scientist thinks I should be doing that. They're a bit worried that that language might sound a bit too twee. And yet I really wanted people to have these ideas. So I just used a metaphoric language to help us to understand science that I think is important and has a capacity to really make lives better for all of us. Anybody who is frustrated by somebody else's behavior would benefit from this book. And carers are often frustrated by other people's behavior, by the behavior of the person they're caring for, whether that's a child whose behavior is confusing, or who refuses to do what you ask them to do, or who has a whole pattern of refusing to do what you ask them to do, or whether you're caring for someone who's older and their behaviors got frustrating or confusing, because that can happen at all ages. This book helps us to understand what is going on underneath, how an underlying stress state is driving behavior. And we don't always have access to somebody else's stress state. So it helps us, I hope, to step into a place of curiosity. And it gives us some clues about what might be going on. And so it just gives you a whole new starting point. And the other thing I hope that it helps us do is to have more compassion. If we understand what's going on with somebody else that's confusing, then we're less frustrated by them. We're more able to step in to help. And so rather than getting frustrated or angry or disciplining children, especially punishing children for things that we often see as bad behavior, this gives us a whole new starting point so that we can step in to help through curiosity rather than to punish because somehow we think that they've done something that's wrong. Often what people need is assistance. And sometimes people say to us, how can you be talking about babies and dementia in the same organization? To my mind, that's easy. Human beings' behavior is underpinned by a biological state and by what we've learned is scary in life and how we've learned how to comfort ourselves. And that matters as much at the older ages as it does at the early ages. It matters as much when you are losing the ability to think and be so aware of what you're feeling and doing, which is what dementia brings. It matters in midlife when we get frustrated. Not everybody understands their own behavior. Not everybody certainly understands their partner's behavior. I hope that this book really helps people to get some core ideas at the center of that will make all our lives better. And I had great fun translating scientific language into language that makes it more accessible to the whole of the public.
Dr. Suzanne Z Dyke there, talking about her book, Saber-Toothed Tigers and Teddy Bears, The Connected Baby Guide to Attachment, which is available from the website connectedbaby.net. And that's it for this podcast. Thank you to my guests, Angie Fergusson of Perth Autism Support, Captain Ian Johnson, Director of Music for the Band of the Mercian Regiment, criminal psychologist, speaker, trainer, author and broadcaster, Linda Sage, and, as we've just heard, Dr. Suzanne Z Dyke. I'm Gary Robinson, and I hope you've enjoyed our first Care Radio podcast. There's much more about Care Radio at our website, careradiouk.com.